Hong Kong just isn't that interesting of a location. That was what I thought up until a lot of much needed research. So today we'll be having a look at what an open world racing game fan might find interesting about the location, as well as the car culture that it brings along with it, and finally summing up with the news of the month. This will be different to my previous videos since those focus on what developers could do or add to the game, whereas this is more for the community and informing it. This did take a fair bit of time to make, so hopefully one or two things you'll find interesting. With that being said, enjoy the rest of the video. So we're gonna split this into two sections, one being Hong Kong Island and the other being other parts of Hong Kong, because while I have explained at great lengths as to why other parts of Hong Kong could potentially be in game, Hong Kong Island is the official island that they've announced for the game that will be a 1-to-1 scale. So if in a further statement they announce that it's only going to be Hong Kong Island or something similar like that, then you'll know which parts of the video are relevant still if you're watching this at a later date. So starting us off, I think a lot of people have already discovered how small Hong Kong Island already is, being like 80 something kilometers squared, being around the same size as Grand Theft Auto 5 and slightly bigger than Forza Horizon 4. Taking that into account, it does have 1/5 of the entirety of Hong Kong's population, so I think it is safe to say that Hong Kong Island isn't just dense from an environmental aspect, but also from a population aspect as well. So I expect a lot of people have already done a lot of digging about the island, so I won't be covering like the really obvious things, and instead I'm gonna go after the less obvious ones. So starting us off, how about the world's largest permanent light show for something of interest? Over 40 buildings on both sides of Victoria Harbour, that's in southern Kowloon and northern Hong Kong Island, they put on a 14-minute light show at 8 PM every day. And while it might not be like, you know, end of year light show, fireworks display-esque, it is still really impressive watching it, and it would really help set the scene that Hong Kong is one of the world's most technologically advanced cities. On top of that, it would really bring life into the city, a problem that most racing games face. I must admit that Hong Kong might not have the same party vibes as Ibiza or Oahu on Hawaii, but the nightlife of Hong Kong will make you think twice, and this light show would really help add the atmosphere of the island transforming at night. Of course we won't get like, you know, a 24-hour day cycle, that would be really silly. But if the light show does get in-game and they do model it in or whatever, then I think this is something that shouldn't scale with how big the day-night cycle is, because 14 minutes I think is short enough for it to not be annoying to the rest of the night, as well as still enough to stop over and watch it and at least appreciate it if you are going to be looking at it anyways. What happens when you combine the iconic San Francisco tram with London's double-decker buses? Hong Kong's double-decker trams, also known as ding-dings, are quite the sight on Hong Kong Island. The Hong Kong Tramways system runs from Kennedy Town to Shao Kai 1, meaning the main line only spans 13 kilometers. The total track length, however, is 30 kilometers, making it the largest double-decker tram system in the world. They have still managed to squeeze 165 individual trams, stopping at apparently 120 different stops. Over 2,000 people use these trams every day, so it is somewhat believable that there are just that many trams and that many stops. As cool as it would be, I don't think the traffic density is gonna be as dense as it is in real life, so not having the space to avoid them isn't something I would be particularly worried about. Another thing they could do for the tram system is just make them stop. I mean, you've seen all of those "can you stop the train" videos in various video games like Grand Theft Auto, Forza Horizon, things like that. And I mean, well, it's nothing game breaking. Like, the tank shooter game War Thunder can do it. Like, that has nothing to do about trains, so if that can do it, then I'm sure many others can put the simple effort to doing this. A racetrack is probably the most requested map feature in any open world racer, so naturally, after the Welcome to Hong Kong Island trailer was released, it didn't take that long for people to find a racetrack on Hong Kong Island. This is the Hong Kong Central Harbourfront circuit used for the Hong Kong I Prix. Similar to Singapore's F1 track, it is a temporary track that uses public roads rather than a permanent track. As you can probably tell, someone has recreated the tracks and its surroundings beautifully in Assetto Corsa. However, while it's cool and all to have a racetrack, I think it's a pretty boring track if I'm completely honest. It's just under 2 kilometers. The track features a big straight followed by a harsh 180, followed by an even bigger straight and then into an extremely slow section and then goes around again. Don't get me wrong, I like slow technical tracks, as well as racing at high speeds, but it's literally a straight line. Forza Horizon 5 motorway. Of course, I have to mention the Peak Tram, also another big feature of Hong Kong Island. The tram itself is interesting, being Asia's first ever cable-driven railway. While it has been partially modernized, this tram has indeed been operating ever since 1888. For reference, that's the same year the first ever production car was built by Mercedes. Despite there being only 4 stops along the way, it doesn't take that long to traverse the just under 1.4 kilometers. It was suggested that a showcase event similar to Horizon could take place here. Personally, I think the showcase events are a really amazing idea. They were truly amazing and thrilling in Forza Horizon 1, though pretty lifeless and boring in Forza Horizon 4. The issue I see with racing the Peak Tram is that it's a fairly short route, being a 5.4 kilometer drive, and you only pass over the route twice before meeting at the top. To make this challenging, I think we should drive the oldest Asian car that we'll have in-game to match the theme of it being the oldest cable-driven railway. While they could specifically add a car for this event, it'd be a bit pointless, so I think naturally the Toyota 2000 GT, a car that I've spoken about a lot, would spring to mind. However, in free roam, this probably won't be something we can ride and experience in-game. Don't worry, because what's at the top is arguably even better. So standing at 552 meters tall, Victoria Peak, or locally known as The Peak, it is the tallest hill in Hong Kong Island, but it's near half what the tallest point in the New Territories is, Tai Mo Shan, which we'll talk about a bit later. From this 360-degree vantage point, you don't just get a great view of the harbour, but you can see the surrounding islands as well. The the Victoria Gap will probably be the part that we're most interested in, because there is quite a big complex here. You have the Peak Tower, the Peak Galleria, and the Peak Lookout, and the Lions Pavilion, which I almost completely forgot. These 4 buildings are pretty iconic to Hong Kong Island, I would say, and don't be surprised if this is a significant location that people will be hanging out by, or even like a significant building in Solar Crown. I mean, it would just be amazing if we could, like, you know, get out and have a look around. But if we could go into some of these buildings, I mean, hey, that's even better. And I mean, look at this road junction outside of the Victoria Gap. Tell me you're not going to do the Iroha-kaza jump right outside there. So yeah, that's kind of it for everything that I could find that I think people would find interesting in Hong Kong Island. So let's go over to what's not on Hong Kong Island. Admittedly, I don't have as many things for the rest of Hong Kong as I did for Hong Kong Island, mainly down to the fact that I wanted to focus my efforts on Hong Kong Island rather than Hong Kong for reasons I already said before. So let's start with the Marshes, because the Marshes are something that sparked a lot of conversation in the community. So after the Welcome to Hong Kong Island trailer, we got a short dev interview, and during the explanation of what environments would be able to drive through, they included marshes in that. And if you've looked on Hong Kong Island, there aren't any. It could be something that's lost in translation, but all of the other things that it could translate to aren't really found on Hong Kong Island anyway. So the Mai Po Marshes, the biggest marsh that Hong Kong has to offer. I believe there's a couple of others, but Mai Po, or Mai Po Nature Reserve, is the most significant one. I could go on about how it has over 400 species of birds, it's managed by the WWF, it's an internationally recognized nature reserve, but I don't think that's quite so interesting for the racing community. This is like one really good place where you'd be able to test the proper off-road abilities of some cars, because I have really struggled trying to find proper off-road trails, because a lot of the paths that you find in Hong Kong and Hong Kong Island are footpaths that are off-road. This would actually be a decent place to test out water wading and in thick mud, things like that. Proper off-roading, granted they model it into the game. So then we have Tai Mo Shan, which I mentioned before, being the highest point, mountain, hill, what have you, whatever you want to call it, on the entirety of Hong Kong. So this is actually a really famous place in the street racing community, which I didn't know before. Probably down to the fact that it's got a pretty decent toge route. I'm driving it in Assetto Corsa right now, but I'm not entirely sure how much further down it goes. Anyways, it is a really fun technical drive, actually. I mean, I can imagine a lot of people, including myself, spending a lot of time here doing toge, whatever you want to call it. You're actually forced to one side of the road because the dividers or the islands occasionally that you have, which makes for an unsuspecting surprise to those who haven't driven it. And honestly, it was really fun driving it for the first time, and now in single player driving it with traffic, it is really fun. Just the unpredictability that you have on this course and just the amount of factors that you have to take into account. I think this would be really fun in game. Next up, we have something finally on Lantau Island. This is the Big Buddha. Not only is this Buddha big, but it's actually called the Big Buddha. It does have an alternate name, Tian Buddha. It is in fact one of the biggest in the world, and it's pretty significant, in a pretty significant place of Lantau Island. Like, you can actually see it from a fair bit of the island. It's something you'll be able to see in the distance, and like sort of just a nice sight to see driving past it. Also really helps setting the scene of it being Hong Kong rather than just a generic open world map. There are quite a lot of steps up to the Buddha, and there isn't like a ramp for cars to get up there. So whether or not we'll be able to go right up to the statue, I'm not entirely sure. But it could also be another opportunity for our characters to get out and like something for them to explore. Just an idea, putting it out there. But yeah. Finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the International Commerce Center, or the ICC. This is the tallest building in Hong Kong, though I have a sneaky suspicion that the Solo Hotel is going to be taller. It's actually the 12th in the world, which I really wasn't expecting. It's only, well, I say only, 450 so meters tall, but that's enough to make it the 12th tallest in the world. It's home to the Sky 1000 viewing platform, as well, which you can get a beautiful vista of the entire harbour, similar to how you can on Victoria Peak, because they're at kind of similar heights. Why I wanted to talk about this is because it's what seems to be the building that people have spoken about a lot. Like, it's been hard trying to find the exact angle that kind of correlates with the ICC and also the background footage. And well, from all the angles that you can get from Hong Kong Island, this camera angle really doesn't make sense at all. And yeah, you'd be able to see the other buildings of Hong Kong if you tried to get anything from Hong Kong Island. However, let's pose a question of it being a fictional building on Kowloon. Now, from this angle, this would make much more sense for what is in the background. It would explain as to why we couldn't see any more city or anything else in the background, and yeah, and why it's just so big. And that would be why you can see it from an angle that you can't see any of the other buildings. This is really the only explanation that I can see, and really the only building that fits this. I did say that it had to be a fictional building because I don't see anything in the vicinity that has a decent amount of height to be able to recreate this. That's pretty much it for things about the map that are interesting. So how about let's have a look at the car culture that Hong Kong has. So I wasn't quite sure if people were going to be interested in seeing the car culture of Hong Kong. This being due to the fact that TDU1 and TDU2, based on Oahu and Ibiza, neither of them followed those islands' car cultures for the player cars. But it would be kind of a shame to have an island that has a lot of Japanese sports car influence to not have Japanese sports cars. That was one of the major drawbacks to TDU1 and TDU2's car list, the fact that it didn't have that many Asian cars. It's a bit sad, but we have an Asian location now, so we better bloody have Asian cars in game. Or should I say JDM? I'll let you guys have this once, because quite a lot of cars in Hong Kong are imported in. JDM cars and supercars or hypercars are probably the first thing you find when you type Hong Kong car culture into Google. Like, there are a lot of them here, and as I said, they are imported here, and like you'll see a lot of classic European cars also imported here, like the Lancia Delta, as someone discovered on the Discord server. Quite a lot of them were imported to Hong Kong and then converted to right-hand drive, which is insane to think about considering how much effort has to go into converting a car of that age to right-hand drive. But I mean, they do it, so. But it's not just classic European, Japanese JDM, supercars, hypercars. There are other things around. Like, you have actual modern European sports saloons bombing around. Like, we have very limited footage of, like, you know, street racing or racing in Hong Kong as is, but like some of the footage that we have driven like BMW M3, M4 sort of things. So like, you know, they do have, like, you know, a lot of European cars as well. The one thing you won't really find that much of are American cars, really. You have to actually physically type in muscle car or like American into Google to find things like that. Like I said though, don't let that make you think that there won't be American cars or anything in game. Another thing I wanted to talk about that I think has been spoken about a bit are the abandoned cars in Hong Kong. There are a hell of a lot of them. Like, you would not imagine the amount of cars that are abandoned here. I mean, it's not just like your stereotypical American junkyard, like where you get shitbox cars. There are like some pretty rare cars that have just been completely abandoned here. This is like some proper Dubai level sort of things. So like, if we do get wrecked cars back in games, or abandoned cars as it could be now, I think that it would really fit in with Hong Kong if we had, like, you know, something that you might not normally see out in the wild. So like a Lamborghini Diablo or something like that is something you could reasonably find as a wrecked car or abandoned car in Hong Kong. Now let's get on to the news aspect of this video. We now know that Unit Image were the ones behind the Welcome to Hong Kong Island trailer. Now, they might have done the head-to-head and also the other announcement trailer for the game, but that information isn't publicly known, at least on their website. This is quite a famous studio because they do a lot of CGI work, most notably for their game trailers, movies, and like TV series. Recent game trailers include Far Cry 6, Death Stranding, but more interesting games for us racing fans are The Crew 1 and The Crew 2. So they did both of those trailers, and those trailers were really, really good. I remember really enjoying The Crew 1's trailer when it came out at launch. Now, a lot of people are probably going to be quite skeptical now knowing this, because you might recall there is no police in The Crew 2, despite there being police showcased in the CGI trailer. I'd say don't worry, because I think game companies have learned their lesson due to the fact that the racing community basically came together and said this is unacceptable. So I do think that this doesn't really change much in the reasoning of other parts of Hong Kong potentially being in game. So we'll have to see where KT goes with that later on. Next up, we have something that went under my radar, or maybe I might have just forgotten about it. Last year, in September, there was an interview with Roman Vincent, the current owner of KT Racing, and he basically went on to say how KT has about 150 employees, that being 100 in Paris and the rest being based in Lyon. The thing that's key here though is that he confirmed that test drive will have been in the works for 5 years up until launch. So that's pretty much the development cycle confirmed for Solar Crown. Like, a lot of people, or like, sorry, should I say, some people have already known this for quite some time, literally finding this article a couple of days after it got released. But as I said, went under my radar, or maybe I have just completely forgotten about it up until now. Finally, let's end on some quite recent news from KT, and rather than it being news, it's sort of speaking about one particular person that works at KT currently. Mariva Roussel, I think that's how it's pronounced, is a vehicle artist at KT. In fact, she's currently the lead vehicle artist at KT, and she is the lead vehicle artist for Solar Crown as well. A bit of background on her is that she was the environment artist for WRC 5, 6, and Isle of Man TT. While I haven't played those games, those environments still look really, really impressive, similar to those of current WRC titles right now. Also being the vehicle artist for V-Rally 4. However, that's kind of where the games that she's worked on end in terms of what is publicly available. It was sort of worrying seeing this initially. The current WRC games, the car models aren't exactly true to how they are in real life. They're sort of recreated rather than like laser scanned and accurately represented in game. Like I said, I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about the cars not being that detailed in Solar Crown as they are in WRC 9 and 10 at the very least. Kind of due to the fact that Miss Roussel hasn't sort of worked on the vehicles in those games. But obviously it's not just one person in charge. But now that she's in charge of the car production, the team management, research and development and outsourcing, I think perhaps we might see a lot higher quality car models for Solar Crown, because as she says, it is her favorite project by far, which is always exciting to see. So that's pretty much it for the news roundup, and that's really pretty much all I have for this video. I know I've been speaking about making this video for over a month now. I mean, it is a pretty long video, but I mean, a lot of stuff has also been happening, going on with me as of recent. As you can probably tell, I've been using Assetto Corsa or whatever in the background footage, that being because like my Xbox 360 controller receiver broke, and well, I haven't quite replaced it yet or deciding what to do for controller right now. Anyways, I hope you found this informative. I mean, thank you all for like stopping by, and as always, thank you for watching.
Yeah.